colleague, Mr. Scott Tiffany. He's the Director of Information Services at the APRL, another fabulous service that we have as part of your APS membership. He will do us the pleasure of introducing our great guest, Mr. Patrick Masalis. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Heidi. My name is Scott Tiffany, Librarian and Director of Information Services at the American Philatelic Research Library. Welcome to everyone who has joined us today for this very special presentation. Before I introduce our distinguished speaker for today's stamp chat, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. First, during today's presentation, all attendees' cameras will be turned off and their audio muted. If you wish to ask a question of our speaker, you may do so at any time by typing your question in the chat box. We will be reading your questions to our speaker following the presentation. We hope to get to all of your questions, but if we do not, feel free to leave your question in the chat box and we will endeavor to have your question answered at a later time. With that, it is my distinct pleasure on behalf of the American Philatelic Society and the American Philatelic Research Library to welcome and introduce Patrick Masalis for today's stamp chat. Patrick has a long and distinguished career in philately. Currently, he serves as the president of the Club de Monte Carlo, the immediate past president of the Royal Philatelic Society London, the past president of Académie Royale de Philatélie Belgique, as well as the council member of the Smithsonian's National Postal Museum and corresponding member of the Académie de Philatélie in France. He is also an honorary member of the Russian Philatelic Academy and the Club of Elite Russian Philately. Patrick's collecting and research interests are primarily focused on the postal history of Belgium and its colonies, as well as the Free State of Congo. He has received numerous honors and awards, among them the Grand Prix at Lux Villa in 2008, Large Golds at Antwerpia in 2010, Brassica in 2014, Europhilex London in 2015, as well as the Golden Post Horn in Sindelfingen in 2013 and 2015. Further to this, he has been awarded the European Philatelic Literature Award in 2005, the Federation of European Philatelic Associations Medal for Literature in 2006, and the same organization's Medal for Exceptional Study and Research in 2010. He has also been honored with the Royal Philatelic Society London's Tapling Medal in 2010 and the Collectors Club of New York Award in 2011. In 2005, Patrick published the book From the Ozars to New Zealand, which appears in 5 editions and in 5 different languages. In 2009, he collaborated in the publication of the book Lado, Postal History of the Enclave. Patrick is a fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society London and in 2012 signed the Royal Distinguished Philatelist. He has also written numerous articles in leading philatelic magazines in Germany and journals from all over the world. A chemist by training, Patrick currently resides in Belgium and is fluent in many languages, including Dutch, French, English, German, Spanish, and Hungarian. With that, it is my honor to introduce Patrick and his presentation today titled Mail from Central Africa Before 1880, Case Study, Belgian Congo. Patrick?
Thank you very much, Scott. And thank you very much to Heidi as well, both of you, to invite me for this presentation. And I hope you didn't get up so early for a boring talk, so I'll do my best to make it a very interesting presentation. First of all, Central Africa before 1880, very few people went there. And before 1880, you also have to realize that the only way you could communicate with the outside world was by mail. So the very few people who went there and who wanted to communicate, they had to find one way or the other to get mail out of Central Africa, and this was extremely difficult, and this is what I'm going to show you today. Something wrong here. I can't get to the, okay. So first of all, who was in Central Africa before 1880? And more precisely, who was in the Congo before that time? Very, very few people. Officials and residents, almost nobody. Traders, from time to time, traders came to the coastal areas, basically, and very few of them came by the Nile and entered the Congo at the border of Uganda and today's South Sudan. Explorers, yes, a few explorers tried to go to that region before 1880. Some missionaries were there and some military, but the military were mainly on the coast and were mainly anti-slavery patrols. All the native people had no written languages, so they had no mail. The only mail we can find is from this handful of Europeans who went to the Congo or who wrote letters to or from the Congo in those days. And as I told you already, they badly needed mail because it was the only way they could communicate with the outside world. And because the area was so hard to get to travel through, only very few people went there before 1880, and so the numbers of letters are very, 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 very limited. My father and me, we have collected since 1960, and in that period we could only identify less than 60 letters from before 1880. So let's now concentrate on all the types of travelers or residents that went to the Congo before the end of the 19th century. I should go up and it doesn't work. Oh no. Now here we are. So the first type of visitors, and actually they weren't always visitors, there were also a few residents, were those who lived in the two areas you can see cross-hatched on the map of the Congo. To the left, you can see that part of it is brownish like Angola, because before 1880, the Portuguese considered the coastal area of today's Congo as being part of Angola, and there were a few Portuguese living in that area, very, very few, but no officials at all. So all the officials were in Angola itself, and if they had to communicate with the people in the Congo, either they had to find a way to send mail, or they had to travel themselves with the mail to the Congo or to that part of Angola, which is today Congo. The same is true at the north east corner of the country, where you can see a greenish cross-hatched area. This was part of, before 1885 actually, this part of the Congo was belonging to South Sudan, was actually part of the Anglo-Egyptian of Sudan. And so in that area, from time to time, some civil servants from the Sudan were traveling. There were no residents, though, in that area. All the few residents in South Sudan in those days were all living in the capital, which was in those days Gondokoro. So the mail we can find relating to the Congo from residents or from officials in those days, or from the very few residents or letters written to the very few residents in that Angolan part of the Congo, and or letters written by officials to the Congo or to or from South Sudan by the officials of the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan. And so I will show you a few examples of these types of mail. The first letter I can show you is actually the oldest letter in private hands relating to the Congo. It's a letter written by the King of Portugal to the governor of Angola relating to the Congo. So since Portugal considered that the coastal area of the Congo was part of their of Angola, so all official mail relating to Congo was sent to Angola, to the governor of Angola, or to officials in Angola itself. There was no one of the officials living in the Congo in those days. This letter from 1653 actually has a very interesting text. It says, or the King of Portugal orders the governor of Angola to wage war against the King of Congo, and you can see that here, fazer guerra al rei de Congo. So you have to make war to the King of the Congo, and the reason is poucos escravos. The reason was that the King of Congo was not delivering enough slaves to the king, to the Portuguese. So a very sad story and a letter with a very sad historical content. This is actually the only letter I've ever seen in private hands. There are a few in Portugal itself, written by the King of Portugal to Angola and relating to the Congo. I have seen, though, in Portugal, letters written by the King of Congo to the King of Portugal, in which he was complaining about the behavior of the Portuguese soldiers and the Portuguese in general against the people of the Congo. These letters are kept in the archives in the Torre de Belém in Lisbon. Another cover which comes from that coastal area and which was at that time considered as being part of Angola is a letter written from Bamvo in Angola by an official, by an Angolan, so a Portuguese official, to one of these rare residents in the Congo. So it was written from Bamvo in Angola to Dembo in the Congo on 7 May 1848. Of course, since there was no mail service, no official mail service between Angola and the Congo, or inside Angola, there was nothing. This letter was probably carried by a private traveler who went to Dembo and to whom this letter was given by this official. You had actually to wait till you had a chance to send a letter before you could send one. This letter by an official in Angola to a resident in the Congo is also the only one I've ever seen of that area. And secondly, when we're talking about officials and residents, at the other side of the country, as I showed you on the map, there is the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, and the very south of the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan became later part of the Congo. So some officials of the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan traveled to the Congo and sent letters. But since there was no mail system, they had to invent their own mail system. And here I'm showing you two examples from letters from General Gordon. The famous English General Gordon was the governor of the province of Equatoria. Equatoria was actually more or less today's South Sudan, the country of South Sudan, and the province of Equatoria, that's almost the same area. But Equatoria was bigger than South Sudan today because it included that small part of the north of Congo and also a large chunk of today's Uganda. So that was the province of Equatoria. And General Gordon, of course, traveled through the whole province for which he was responsible. And so he has been also in the Congo, although it was not called Congo in those days. And I found 2 letters that he sent from the Congo in 1876 when he was inspecting the area. And how do we know that these letters are from the Congo and not from any other place in South Sudan? Because, well, it's easy. He put the name of Magungo as the place where he sent the letter from. And I had never heard of Magungo. I never heard of it later on either. But fortunately, on one of the 2 letters, he drew a map where Magungo is. And you can see that Magungo is on Lake Albert, on the Congolese side of Lake Albert. So without any doubt, these 2 letters have been sent from the Congo, from today's Congo. And how did it work? Well, since there was no official mail system, General Gordon organized his own mail system. So he gave the letters, he put the letters in metal tubes that he had designed. They were specially designed to put letters inside. He gave these metal tubes to a soldier or a few soldiers. They had to carry them overland to Gondokoro. As I told you, Gondokoro was the capital of the province of Equatoria. And in Gondokoro was on the Nile, and in Gondokoro, Gordon had his own official riverboat. He had a steamer on the river because he was the governor. He had such a nice boat, and on his own boat, the mail in the tubes he designed, the metal tubes he designed himself, all that mail was then brought to Khartoum, and there it was very easy. All the mail had to be handed over to Mr. Giegler, who was the Postmaster General in Khartoum. And from Khartoum onwards, which is today's capital of Sudan, from Khartoum onwards, the mail system started, and you could send letters with stamps on them worldwide. So that's how Gordon organized his own mail. As you understand, it was a lot of work and a lot of thinking to design such a complicated mail system. But not only a few residents and a few officials traveled to the Congo, another kind of people also traveled there, and these were the businessmen, the traders. We know actually of 2 kinds of traders who went to the Congo before 1880, and most of them were either slave traders or ivory traders. The ivory traders were a bit later on the coast. There were more ivory traders in the east of the country, but the ivory traders in the east were from Zanzibar, were Arab traders, and so I have never seen letters from them. But the traders on the coastal area were mostly slave traders, so the few letters I've ever seen from traders in the Congo came from slave traders. Very few, of course, of these letters have survived, because later on, if you found out that your ancestors had been in the slave trade, that was not something to be very proud of. So most families destroyed all the letters they had of their ancestors who were in this trade, and therefore slave letters or letters from slave traders are very, very rare. Another thing you have to know is that the slave trade was a intercontinental trade. So the traders left Europe with weapons, with metal objects that were useful in Africa, and with alcohol, with gin or cognac or whatever. They sailed to Africa, for example, to the Congo, and there their weapons, the metal tools, and the alcohol were actually exchanged for slaves, and the slaves were caught by African kings who took slaves from other tribes and sold them to the Europeans. Once they had enough slaves, they sailed to America, to South America or the Caribbean mainly, later on also to North America, and exchanged the slaves for sugar, for silver, for gold, for any product that could be bought in the Americas, and then they sailed back to Europe. This means that they were away for 2 to 3 years, and that these slave traders badly wanted to send mail when they were in Africa, because they knew they would not get home before 2 years or more. So they really tried to send mail while they were in Africa. And how could they send mail? By handing over their letters to other ships passing by. And these were mainly ships coming from India, with trade from India and from China. And so when they saw a friendly ship, they gave their letters to the captain of that friendly ship, and so the letters came back to Europe while they continued their journey to South America, and then much later on back to Europe. All of these letters were sent in up to 5 copies and entrusted to up to 5 captains, because it was never sure that a letter would reach destination. So much could happen during the trip. So many fights were going on between ships of states that were each other's enemies, that actually, to be sure that these letters reached destination, they wrote 5 times the same letter. And the letter you can see here is one of these slave letters from slave traders, sent in 1733 from Cabinda to Sluis in Holland. It was entrusted to Captain Pix, and Captain, you can see it here. It was important that the name of Captain Pix was on the cover, because Captain Pix was the one who got the fee for ship letters in the port of destination. In this case, it was through England. We can see this because of the bishop mark here. So Captain Pix was probably an English captain, and he got the usual fee for ship letters because his name was on the cover. Once the letter arrived in England, it joined the postal, the regular post, and it was sent to Holland. And you can see that the tariffs are written here for Holland, which are the regular rates for letters from England to Holland. I will try to explain the rate. Yeah. It says 2 shillings 6 pence. This was the normal rate for a letter to West Africa. That's here. That was the rate that was charged by Britain for any letter coming from West Africa, the ship letter rate. And you can see here 1 groot the G, the 1 groot, was the price to be paid to bring the letter from the port in the Netherlands to the city of Sluis. And so together, this was then the price of the letter to be paid. Besides traders, we also know of explorers going to the Congo, especially at the end of the 19th century. Central Africa was one of the last places that had not been explored by Europeans, together with Antarctica. The rest of the world had more or less been explored, but Central Africa was still a very unknown region. And so the people who went there, the explorers who went there, went to a place where no European had been before. So not only no mail system, they also didn't know anything about the area they went to. And one of these explorers was Dr. Livingstone, who at that time lived in South Africa. And he intended to make a trip overland from South Africa, and that's the red line on the map on the left, from South Africa to the north until he would reach the Zambezi and the Kasai River. He would follow these rivers until he reached the coast in Angola, and then he would come back on his steps, come all the way back where he came, and then cross Africa on the Zambezi River up to the coast in East Africa in Mozambique. So he had plans, wild plans, I would say, for a trip of about 3 years in which he would cross on foot about half of the African or a quarter of the African continent to the north, and then the whole continent from west to east. Of course, when he was away for 3 years, he knew that he would receive no news from his family, no official news, and he was thinking of a way to get at least some mail, because that was the only way of communication. I can only repeat myself. He was looking into a way of receiving mail. And because Dr. Livingstone was a man who spoke so many languages from the native people, he also noted their stories, their beliefs, their religions. He came to a conclusion that in all these languages, the story of the holy tree on the holy river, on the island in the holy river, always came back. And so he started to think that this holy tree on this holy island might be a real tree and not something of the imagination of the local people. And well, he was gambling. He said, well, let's assume that this tree exists. And so before he left, he asked his father-in-law to collect all the mail that came in for him. And 1 year after his departure, he asked his father-in-law to give all these mail in a bag, in a big bag, to some Matabele runners. And these Matabele runners had to bring the mail to the holy tree on the holy island in the holy river. Well, since Livingstone was right, the tree was not imagination. The tree existed. These Matabele runners found the tree. And also this was no surprise to Livingstone, because he compared it to Europeans to sending African people to Europe in 1880 and telling them, please put my mail at the front door of Notre Dame in Paris. There was a big chance that these people would have found Notre Dame as well. So he said, this is like the Notre Dame for them, and they will find the tree. The mail was buried at the foot of the tree. 1 year later, Livingstone came at the same spot, dug up his mail, and so he got news from home about, not so fresh, it was about 1 year old, that news, but still he got some news and he got mail. And so a few dozens or even more of letters were buried under a baobab tree on the big island for Dr. Livingstone. Later on, I traveled myself to that place and tried to find out where that island was. And actually, I think I found it. I think it's Impalila Island in the Zambezi River in the Caprivi Strip of Namibia. Here you can see one of these letters that were buried under the tree. And on the left, you can see a small image of the tree. And on the bottom also, you can see how the tree looks like. Why do I think it is this tree? Well, it's the biggest baobab in the Zambezi River in that area, and it has been used by the South African Army until 1980 as a watchtower because it was the highest point in the area. They just climbed in the tree and used it as a watchtower. Another explorer was Stanley, Henry Morton Stanley. And Stanley also crossed Africa, not from west to east, but from east to west, from the island of Zanzibar to the mouth of the river Congo. And basically, for his meal, the first part was the easy part, because until he reached the Tanganyika Lake, so the middle of the continent, he met quite a few caravans from Arab traders that went to Zanzibar. So there was always the possibility to give meal to these caravans, and they brought it to Zanzibar from where there was a functioning postal system. But on the second part of his trip, actually he never thought he would have that second part, because when he started his trip, it was not his intention to cross Africa, but it was his intention to cross Africa until Tanganyika Lake, look for the river that went from Tanganyika Lake to the Nile, and then continue his journey up the Nile through Sudan up to Cairo. So he had no intention, so he was not even planning for meal after he reached Tanganyika, because then he said, once I'm in the Sudan, I can send my meal through the river post on the Nile. But that big river that he was following, and of which he thought that it was the source of the Nile, turned out to be the Congo. And instead of going north, all of a sudden it bended and it went west. And he ended up in the jungle, and he was struggling for 2 years, but he survived. And at the very end of his trip, he almost reached the mouth of the Congo. At that point, he could only send letters by runners, so people from his who worked for him, who would bring the letters on foot to anyone. So here you can see one of these letters from the beginning of his trip. As you see, it says Lake Victoria, 1875, Central Africa, and it was carried by an Arab caravan to Zanzibar, and from where it went to London. And in Zanzibar, it was posted and followed a regular mail system. The second letter, though, and from the second part of his expedition, so from the last 2 years, only 2 letters are known. The first one is sent to any gentleman who speaks English at Mboma and is dated August 6, 1877. What happened? Stanley almost reached the coast. He knew by then, he knew that for 1.5 years he had been traveling on the Congo River, so that he crossed actually Africa through the Congo. But at the end of the trip, he came in areas that were not very fertile, so there was no food anymore, there was no game to shoot, so he actually was in a state of imminent starvation, and that's what he's writing to. And the only thing he could think of, being already at 2-3 days walking from the first Portuguese settlement. As I told you at the very beginning, there were a few Portuguese residents in the Congo. He knew that there was a Portuguese settlement in Boma in the Congo, and he knew that Boma was about 3 days away from where he was. So he sent a boy with a letter to any gentleman who speaks English at Mboma, in which he says he is starving and in which he asked for food for 115 people. As you can read, for myself, tea, coffee, and sugar and whatever, but for the other people, whatever they could miss, they could send to him. Of course, when you get a letter like that and you're living in Boma, to any gentleman who speaks English, I'm in a state of imminent starvation, please send food for 115 people. There was a chance that this letter wouldn't be taken very seriously. And therefore, Stanley put some weight to his words by adding PS. You may not know me by name. I therefore add that I am the person who discovered Livingstone in 1871. Well, in those days, Henry Morton Stanley was world famous. Everybody knew him because he was that famous journalist who discovered Livingstone in 1871. The whole world knew that story. So the people who got this letter knew that they could expect to meet with Henry Morton Stanley himself. The letter arrived in Boma. Mr. Mota Vega received it, and Mr. Mota Vega sent food. Because of this, Stanley survived, and if Stanley had not survived, the country, the Congo, would never have existed. Most probably in 1885 in the conference of Berlin, it would have been simply split between England and France, so, and maybe also to the east to Germany, and there would have been no country Congo, but Zambia would have been much bigger, and the French Congo would have been much bigger, but the country itself exists because this letter reached destination. Of course, I've shown you now 2 letters of very famous explorers. There were also explorers of whom you've never heard, and one of them was Mr. Adolphe Bordeaux, a Belgian, who went from Zanzibar to Lake Tanganyika, and of his expedition, only one letter has survived, the one you can see here from the Association Internationale Africaine. That was the association that paid for the trip. And he says, look, I'm in Kinsinda in Central Africa, Afrique Centrale, par caravane descendante. So by caravan descending to the coast, to Zanzibar, by caravan, by an Arab caravan, I'm sending my letter. So I'm showing you this letter too, because here you have the real proof that a caravan, an Arab caravan, took the letter, and I haven't seen this mentioned on other covers. Besides all these interesting people who went there for their own glory, there were also missionaries who went to the Congo actually to bring the faith and to help the people, so not for their own profit, but actually for reasons of philanthropy. One of them was Father Vinke, and he was the first Belgian who went to the Congo. He went there in 1885, so now I'm 5 years behind, but I couldn't find any letter from a missionary from before that date, so that's why I'm showing this one. And he lived in Impala on Lake Tanganyika. You can see on the map in red where Impala is. So from Impala to the nearest post office, Zanzibar, 1,500 kilometers. Must be 1,000 miles to the nearest post office, and no highway, no train, nothing. Just on foot, you could bring mail from Impala to Zanzibar. And for this, Father Vinke, when he wrote the letter, he gave it also to these Arab traders who went, or Arab caravans who went to Zanzibar. And here you can see one of these letters. It was sent by Father Vinke to his family in Kortrijk, or to his best friend, Gus de Boot. And it's because of this name, Gus de Boot, that I later found out that it was Father Vinke. And by now, also the handwriting of Father Vinke has been identified. And on the reverse, you can see an A and a V, but I haven't shown the reverse, which is the final proof that it came from Father Amat Vinke, AV. So brought by caravans to 1600 kilometers down the road to the nearest post office, and from there it went with stamps from Zanzibar. And in those days, Indian East India postage stamps were used in Zanzibar. And finally, a last type of people who went to Central Africa, well, the military. And in this case, the case of Congo, of Central Africa, I only know, before 1880, I only know of anti-slavery patrols. So from 1808 on, we have seen British anti-slavery patrols in the Congolese waters, and from 1820 onwards, Americans. The American mail went either via regular mail to one of the neighboring countries, mostly to Angola, or the mail from the ships was handed over to a post office in Angola. When the ships stopped to refuel, they had to stop in Angola, so that was the most widely used way of communication. Another way was the same way as I explained to you before for the slave traders. They just handed over the letters to a ship passing by and going to Europe, or in the best case, going straight to the US. British mail. There was an internal mail service of the British Royal Navy, so the Royal Navy took care of the mail, but also some letters were sent via other ships, so are also regular ship letters. Here is the first example of an American anti-slavery patrol, a letter from USS Dale, sent to the USA on 7 February 1858. If you look at this cover, it looks like a simple letter from New York to Boston, because it was unfranked. It has a 10-cent postage due stamp on it, so twice the rate. But only if you open it, you can see that it's actually a letter from the Congo. And what happened with this letter? It was written on the Congo River, large African river, the Congo, as you can see in the text. And an occasion occurred to send mail when the ship passed by another American ship heading to the Cape Verde Islands. And in the Cape Verde Islands, the intention was to put it in the mail system, but apparently, because this letter doesn't bear anything, actually, in the Cape Verde Islands, it was probably given to the captain of a ship heading directly to the US, and it was simply dropped in a letterbox somewhere in the US. Second one is a letter. So the letter we just saw was a ship letter. It was entrusted to the captain of another ship. This is one of these letters, very few letters, the only one in my collection that went through regular mail. So it's a letter written from the US to the USS Mohican on the Congo River. on 19 January 1861. Because there was no mail in Congo, it was sent to Luanda, St. Paul de Luanda, the capital of Angola, and there at the post office it was kept until a crew member of the Mohican, which went to Luanda for refueling, until one of these crew members came to pick up all the mail that came in for that particular ship. We also, of course, know of mail written from British anti-slavery patrols. This is one from 9 January 1861, written on Congo River, as you can see on top. And it was sent to England went through the Royal Navy mail, this mail system of the Royal Navy, and 6 pence was the officers' concessionary rate for letters from English officers. Another one, the one on top, was sent from a crew member of the HMS Zebra, also from Congo River, to the UK on 17 July 1864. That cover actually was a ship letter because it was given to the captain, and we know that because of the text of the captain of a ship who went to St. Helena. And in St. Helena, so another Navy ship that went to St. Helena, and from St. Helena, it was handed over to the captain of a regular ship that took the letter to the UK. 1 penny is the ship letter rate, and then another penny for the internal rate to bring the letter from wherever in England to Sussex to its destination. And the second letter on the bottom is one sent from the UK to the Congo River on 21 March 1857. You can see the address, Sharks Point, River Congo. So through the Royal Navy mail, this letter reached its destination, and the Mr. Keppel on the HMS Avon got his mail, otherwise I wouldn't possess this cover. A special case here is the correspondence between 2 anti-slavery patrol ships. This is a letter from HMS Rattler to HMS Pinnace on the 12th December 1850, and of course nothing had to be paid. It was free franking between 2 Navy ships. And finally, a very nice couple. I had in my collection a letter from Dr. Burke, written to Mrs. Burke in April 1868. And many years later, a Swiss friend of mine had seen my letter, and he said, I have one from Mrs. Burke to her husband, and because the date of the letter from Mrs. Burke to Dr. Burke is October 1868, it could have been the reply to the first one. So even if it is not true, I believe it is true, and that's enough. So the first one, how did the first one, the one from Dr. Burke, how did it reach Ireland? Well, we know that he was on the HMS Jazer, and the Jazer was in Banana, Congo in April 1868. So he left the letter at a Dutch trader, Kerdijk. You can see the stamp of the Kerdijk company here. And the Kerdijk said, we expect a ship coming from Holland and going back to Holland very soon. So Mr. Burke left his mail there, and very soon was from April to end of May. And on the 6th of June, the mail, it reached England, Rotterdam, and from Rotterdam it was sent by regular mail to Ireland for the price of tariff of 6 pence. So it was that was the regular rate for the last leg of the journey. For the return, Mrs. Burke sent a letter to HMS Zebra, west coast of Africa. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can try today to send a cover to the west coast of Africa. I don't think it will reach destination, but the Royal Navy mail was much better organized than probably any post office today. So a letter which just said west coast of Africa and the name of a person and a ship reached destination in those days. And so I'm at the end of my presentation. You have seen a few letters, a few of the 60 that are known, or less than 60 that are known. And all these covers I've shown, these few covers I've shown, already show you 9 different mail systems. We have seen one from the King's own mail service and for King of Portugal. We have seen letters carried privately. We have seen letters which were sent by African runners. We have seen letters by Arab caravans, Gordon's tube mail, Livingstone's mail system, the Royal Navy mail. We have seen a few ship letters. And last but not least, there was also regular mail, but not to the Congo, but to neighboring countries. So 9 different mail systems for only 60 covers known. If any of you know of a 10th mail system, you can always give me the letter and I will pay you back in chocolates and beer. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Patrick. There's a wonderful presentation with a lot of great pieces that were shown by everyone. We have one question so far. If you have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat box. We received a lot of, while you were talking, Patrick, a lot of thank yous for the presentation. A lot of people saying hello. Just wanted to pass some of those along as well. But our first question talked about the tree with the mail in it or under it, and thought it was such a wonderful point of history. Do you know if it is registered as a protected site or if anything is done to protect or preserve that tree?
No, I've been to that place. It's actually it's at the opposite side. It's the Chobe National Park in Botswana, and the other at the site where Impalila Island is it's also more or less protected as a national park. So in this regard, it is safe. But the tree itself is not protected as a monument, but the area around it is protected.
Very good. If all the 60 covers, does this include examples in archives or are these from other people's collections? Yeah.
No, it doesn't. It includes everything I know. Okay. If I look at my own covers before 1860, maybe half of them. Maybe less.
Okay. Another question. What first attracted you to this period of postal history in philately?
Well, I started by collecting stamps of the Congo. And so, as many people, once you are interested in stamps, you start to be interested by covers as well. And then you go deeper and deeper. First covers with stamps and then stampless covers. And for the Congo, the material is so scarce and it's so hard to find them because people who have these letters sometimes don't realize what they have. As I showed you that letter from New York to Boston, you could think you have simply a letter from New York to Boston, but it's actually a letter from the Congo. So it's so hard to identify them. Sometimes you have to read them to know that this hunt became kind of a hobby. Some will say, other will say an obsession. My wife says that. So it depends on how you look at it.
Sure. We always like to hear the interesting stories behind collecting. Is there a particular item in your own collection that you'd like to share a favorite story about how you acquired it?
In my collection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a stamp actually. It's a sheet.
Okay.
Yeah. The biggest collector of Congo was General, what's his name again? A famous Belgian general. Sorry that I. And his collection was kind of surrounded by some stories, and because he never showed it to anyone. General Dufour, he never showed it to, or rarely showed it to anyone. So there were always rumors of what he had and what he didn't have. When he died, the family kept the collection, and only when his wife died 20 years later, the family sold the collection. And of course, all these iconic items we all knew that could be there were there, except for one. We knew that there was a full sheet of the rarest stamp of the Congo, of the 5 franc, that there was a full sheet of that stamp in his collection. Moreover, the stamp was printed on sheets on 150 with 2 blank spaces left and right, and only 50 stamps in the middle, because the time was so short to design the stamps and print them that they decided just to use the sheets of Belgium, but they had no time to make so they had no time to make 150 copies of that of the die, so they just made 50 and printed a few, I would say 50 or 60 sheets of that stamp. And so they had these 2 blocks of 50 blank stamps left and right to it. That item had been described, had been seen, was supposed to be in his collection, and was not there when the collection was sold. 2 years after the sale, on an evening, someone rings my bell. I open the door, and there is a young guy there, and he says, "Are you the man who bought many stamps from my grandfather in the auction?" And he said, "My grandfather is General Dufour." I said, "Yes, I'm the person." Then he said, "Well, we are now selling the house of grandfather, and while we were throwing away all the old newspapers and all the old rubbish, I said, well, I will give it a closer look. And the paper that was already on the street to be taken as litter, I opened it and I found stamps. Maybe they have some value." When he opened the folder, the big folder, it was that sheet with these 2, with that full sheet of the rarest stamp of the Congo. Because it was so big, he couldn't put it in his albums or somewhere else with his collection. He had put it somewhere, God knows where, and the family found it, and it almost ended up in the incinerator in Belgium.
Wow, that's fantastic. We have a few more questions. What was the initial action taken by Leopold to control the Congo? Was this part of the 1885 Berlin Conference?
No, the Berlin Conference was the end. The first action was 1876. He organized a congress in Belgium to which he invited all the most famous explorers of those days. And from that, so in this way, all the big explorers, all the famous explorers became friends of his. And so he got all the information firsthand. And then he sent 3 explorations actually through Tanzania to Lake Tanganyika. His first goal was actually not the Congo, but was Lake Tanganyika. One of these covers I've shown you from Dr. Burdo, and so he was trying to have some part of what became later German East Africa. He was trying his chance there, and then Stanley all of a sudden popped up in at the mouth of the Congo River. He had crossed the continent, and this news quickly reached Leopold. So he said, "I need Stanley, and the Congo, the area he went through. He has all the knowledge. There's no one else who has been there. Oh, no European, I mean." So then he hired Stanley, and so he could take the Congo.
Very well. We have one last question. Do you also collect more recent Congolese mail, say 1960 and on?
No, I only collect until 1960. Once Congo became independent, the postal system was not so reliable anymore, and the stamp issues were for collectors only. They never went through the post, so for me that's less interesting.
Very well. Well, I just want to say this concludes today's stamp chat. We would like to sincerely thank Patrick again for this informative and engaging presentation. We would also like to thank all those for attending today's stamp chat, and we invite you to future presentations. With that, I will pass it back to Heidi for a few closing comments.
Well, friends, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure to look at the questions in the chat box and see where you're all joining us from. That is truly the beauty of philately, is the global nature of this and the fellowship and the continued learning and sharing. And we really are honored and thank Mr. Masalis for joining us and catalyzing this wonderful call of over 200 people. We thank you. Again, this presentation, the APS Stamp Chats, are brought to you by the generosity and commitment and dedication of APS members, of which many are on the line. And we thank all the international members that have joined, particularly during this time of pandemic. We appreciate your enthusiasm and continued support. We look forward to more Stamp Chats, and we look forward to you going over to stamps.org, where you can learn more about the American Philatelic Society. It's 134 years of fellowship and stamp collecting, philately. We've got memberships for people under 30. We have digital memberships and a whole host of information, including the APRL, which is the library online. So do go over to stamps.org and check us out. If you are not a member, we encourage you to become one. And again, we thank everyone from around the world for joining us today. We wish you continued health, and join us again on another Stamp Chat. You can find the Stamp Chat schedule on stamps.org/news. Tomorrow night, we have a Stamp Chat at 7 p.m. with Mr. James Gates of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. So we hope to see you on that call. Again, thank you so much, friends, for joining us. And Patrick, thank you for doing us the honor of a beautiful presentation. We really appreciate it. Merci beaucoup. Shalom, namaste, aloha to all of our friends around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heidi and Scott.
That will conclude our Stamp Chat, friends. Take care, and we will see you on another APS Stamp Chat. Take care.